Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Davina Ware, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of People in Transition. Ever since we met on LinkedIn, I've been excited about the conversation that we're going to have.
Likewise, I'm really excited to be here and to dive into something that's so important to so many people.
Davina, when you were younger, what was the picture that you had of yourself, of what you were going to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a chemist, surprisingly, because I love science and the experiments and different reactions to things. So I thought I was going to be a chemist.
And what were the transition moments that you've experienced along your life trajectory that took you from that picture of yourself as a chemist to where you're at today?
There were a couple of really sobering things. One was that in high school, I started to take AP level chemistry and AP level physics, and I hated it. I hated it so much. It was a lot of heads down. It was a lot of technical information. And my gift, though, is speaking, is being able to have influence and to inspire people. So knowing how much of a hard time I was having with the chemistry and the physics, because it wasn't fun to do anymore. It felt just like a heavy burden of work. And I was the captain of my speech team in high school. And I decided, okay, I feel good about this. I didn't know there were careers in this space. So I just decided to make that pivot. And the speech team communications route was just a better choice for me.
Davina, let's jump right into some questions here. First one, if you're coaching one of your clients, how do you help them deal with the fear and the embarrassment that they might experience after losing their job?
That's an excellent question, because a lot of people don't talk about the embarrassment of no longer being employed. In some cases, people found their sense of self-worth from being employed. So the first thing I do is share my personal stories and testimonies of being laid off, of being fired, all of those things. So one, let them know that they're not alone. I've experienced this, but I also help them to focus on this as an opportunity. What were some things that you didn't enjoy that now you can course correct and make sure that it's part of your standards when you start at your new position? And the other thing I try to get them to see is maybe blind spots. Where are there areas in life where you didn't consult your purpose? Was that part of this job journey that you were on? And if not, this is that opportunity to really plant your feet into something that's going to allow you to grow mind, body, and spirit.
Let's talk about personal branding and how important is that to professionals making a career transition?
I think it's one of the most foundational elements of a career transition. One, there's just a lot more people out there in the field that are searching for jobs. So some industries can be heavily saturated, and it's also become way more easier to apply for a job. You can apply with one click on LinkedIn now. So hiring managers just receive an abundance of resumes and information. So branding is what helps them pick you out of the bunch. Even if you have the same degree or skill set as someone else, your experience is very personalized to you. your experience, your natural gifts and talents, and your competencies are always going to be very differentiating for you. So packaging that as a solution that you can bring to employers, it creates this dynamic where people start looking for you because they know you for your solutions and not just the fact that you need a job.
Davina, do you think it's better to be viewed by the hiring manager as a generalist or as a niche specialist?
Oh, that's an excellent question. In some cases, it depends on the role. So let's say you're looking for a sales job. They want high performers. In that scenario, they care more about what results you can bring. So having a niche there, maybe it'll help in the hiring and the recruiting process, especially if you are familiar with that industry, you've worked within a similar team before. But outside of that, I would definitely focus on niching down, period, because it helps employers to see, okay, she was really created for this position, or she has so much experience in this one space. It gives focus. And people of my generation, I'm a millennial, have done a lot of job hopping. And so naturally, we see a lot of generalist roles for them, and they may find it difficult to find a role that says, well, we want 5 or 6 years experience because of job hopping, which there are some pros to that. We don't really sit down enough to build that longevity, to build a consistency in how you're using a skill. So if you niche down in terms of industry, in terms of what skills you'd like to use, the kind of environment, and you get to practice that over and over and over again, that becomes expertise. So niching equals expertise. And that's why I think that way is much better for employees and professionals to look into if they're going to brand themselves.
Davina, let's go back to that branding for a moment. And you said that that was a foundational element during your transition. How do you coach your clients to build that personal brand?
The very first thing I start with is you internally. When we're looking for new careers, new jobs, and we're looking to transition, naturally, most of us look for what's outside of ourselves. What's out there? Where can I be happy at within this environment? All of these very external factors. But in order to build an unshakable and irresistible personal brand, you have to start with you. And some people feel like it's selfish, or it just seems very oxymoronic in terms of, well, you're the person in need that needs the job. So we don't think oftentimes that we can be in the driver's seat. And that's certainly not true. It's starting off with, what do you actually want to do over a long period of time where you can be successful at it, where you want to get some upskilling and education to support that. What is that thing? How do you want to spend your time as a professional in a working capacity? That's the first thing I start with. And the next thing is, what skills do you want to use? We have a lot of skills. It's really easy to pick up things, especially if you happen to be a job hopper, or if you just like picking up knowledge on your spare time. You don't have to use all of those. You don't have to take all of that with you to the next rung on your career ladder. In fact, it doesn't behoove you to do that, because it doesn't show that you are an expert in anything, that you don't specialize in anything. So ultimately, what do you have to offer? What do you want to do? And the next question is, where do you want to do it? We have to think about environment. Do you need to be in a smaller team under a delegated leader that's going to give everyone some responsibility where you can collaborate? Or do you need to be in a much more fast-paced, a larger company who's known for a certain expertise, and you want to use that to sharpen your skills? So thinking about the what you have to offer, what do you want to use, where do you want to work, or you can even say, who do you want to work for? Answering those questions help you to build your brand.
Davina, you generally find your job with your third or fourth level contacts. That was a quote that I read in a recruiting magazine recently. What does that mean to you, and how do you achieve those third and fourth level contacts?
Having conversations, networking, especially when you know what you do well, and who your audience is in terms of an employer, because it naturally comes up in conversations with friends and family, or even water cooler talk. So I think that thinking long range as well, you've heard me say the term a couple times within this space, career ladder, and when you have an idea of exactly what you want to do, you can start to see what that trajectory builds. So then you start to think about, okay, 2 years from now, I'd like to be on the next rung of my career ladder. And then 5 years from now, I'd like to be here. So again, starting with what you want to do and what skills you want to use will give you a full career pathway. Then you can see who else is there already. So, and if it's people within your network, maybe they're not your primary contacts, maybe they're secondary, tertiary, but you can start to build those relationships and ask questions to determine, what do I need to get to this rung of the ladder? Is it more education? Do I need to build relationships with certain departments or certain people? Do I need to move out of the state and be closer to certain facilities? So ultimately, it starts with vision and having an idea of where you want to go and what's there already, to be able to ask the questions and to find the people that'll help to close that gap for you in terms of achieving that space, but also within your own clarity. So we're not guessing at things or throwing spaghetti on a wall, figuring out what career path will stick.
Davina, on your website, Upwardly Paved Path, you talk about the 4 points to networking like a pro. And you've said a couple of times networking being important. Can you describe those 4 key points?
Yes, absolutely. The first one is, where do you want to go and why? So that piggybacks off what I was just mentioning of, okay, you're in a job, you're within a career, you're working there, you have personal and financial goals you want to reach. But to be networking like a pro, or networking as part of your personal brand strategy, it goes back to that vision. Where do you want to go and why? Do you want to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company? That's a very specific thing, but it's a goal that you can work toward, which means that in terms of who you talk to, it makes sense that they would be folks within that industry, that they would be people that are already down that path, as opposed to stabbing in the dark, which goes back to your initial question about, is it important to be niche or to generalize? But when you have a sweet spot and you've niched down, you start to understand who the key players are at that position that you want to obtain to get promoted. So first, where do you want to go? Thinking about your career ladder, and why. Why is now integrating your personal goals with that, your work-life balance. So that gets to be part of the conversation. The next thing is to start engaging these people. So now that we know where we want to go and we have an idea of who the key players are and where to find them, now it's time to engage with them. It's great to find professional associations where it's normally a smaller group of people and you can have intimate conversations and build relationships there so that they can reach out to you for a promotion, or you can have an informational interview for you to just make sure and confirm that this is the path that you want to be on, that you've selected for yourself. So after you've engaged with the key players within this network, after identifying where you want to go and why, now you need to have your brand elements, as I like to call them. So it's creating a one-pager with your portfolio or interesting projects you've been a part of. It's your business cards, your online portfolio. You need somewhere to point people. So when you start engaging with these key players and key stakeholders within your industry, you have to leave them with something. Conversations are great, but if you don't make that connection or don't give them something, they're going to be talking to 30 other people that day. So it's easy to get lost. But to show them something that's memorable that they can think about and take with them and say, oh, yeah, that's great. So you become top of mind for them. And then also following up. I've gone and seen that so many times people go to networking events and there's no plan for a follow-up. It's that sense of, yeah, let's get together and have lunch. But then nothing's ever on the calendar. It will get lost unless there's an appointment that's attached to it. So building your brand and then presenting your brand. And then I would say the last thing is taking it to the next level, or making it a little bit more personal, which is hosting your own networking event. That gives you a little bit more of control and authority to be in the driver's seat, to invite people into your space. And if you're the organizer, then you have no choice but to operate with these people because you're connecting with them for them to come to your event. So at that point, it's taking networking into your own hands, being an authority figure and an influence within that industry, because you're inviting folks for a panel discussion or a coffee chat or a Zoom meeting with other people that your family, your friends who would be interested in this information. So it allows you to start the conversation as opposed to maybe stumbling in on it.
What are some of the do's and don'ts that you talk about to conduct a successful job interview?
Love that question, because interviews is where people can trip themselves up for a lot of reasons. One of the do's is always research the company. And if you can, obtain the list of the folks that you'll be interviewing with and do a little research so that when you are having some small talk or part of the conversation becomes a little less formal, you can say, oh, well, I know you've worked for 5 years at this company. It's impressive, one, that you would take the time to look, but B, it allows them to talk a little bit about themselves. People like to talk about themselves. And if you give space for that in an interview, you can start to build rapport when you do that. I would also say as a do is to be honest. Sometimes we really want to impress the employer, especially when it comes to the question of what is your biggest weakness? And people say, oh, I work really hard. It's one of those situations where it's really not that bad of a thing and it makes you look like a hero on the other end. Well, interviewers are people too, and they understand that you can't be perfect and that people have weaknesses. So being honest about that, but also insert the solution of how you're working on it. I'm a person, I don't always delegate because for me, it seems easier to just do it myself. But I've been working on that. And I can share that with the employer so they have confidence in my abilities, but they also see that I take initiative for growth and that I can be flexible. One of the don'ts is don't arrive to an interview too early. You would think that, okay, if I'm really early, this shows that I'm very punctual, but it actually puts pressure on people. If you show up to an interview a half an hour early, 45 minutes early, an hour early, it's like, oh, well, we don't want you to be sitting there for an hour, so we're kind of scrambling to accommodate you. So it creates this awkward situation and perhaps this sense of rushing because you got there too early. And it also looks like that you don't have anything else to do. You don't have anything else going on for yourself in life, or maybe you don't have good time management by showing up too early. The other don't that I would say in an interview is not following up. This is kind of after the interview, but even just a simple thank you, it seems like an antiquated idea. If you had great rapport and conversation with the folks that you interviewed with, you can just follow up and say, hey, I'm really grateful for our conversation. It's again, keeps you on top of mind. We don't know how many other folks they're interviewing. It's professional for you to do that. Even if you don't get the job, the employer will remember you for taking that small step. So those I would consider my biggest do's and don'ts when it comes to job interviewing.
Davina, you talked about being honest. So as a candidate, should you talk about your values with the hiring manager?
Yes, especially if those values align with the mission, vision, and values of the company that you work for. And it also shows initiative. Most people aren't going to sit down and talk about their values as part of an interview because most people don't have them. But another great talking point to say, well, one of the things I value is integrity. And I can see that that's something you value as well as a company. It's just one of those really impressive things that employers will remember you by just from making that small tweak and how you approach an interview.
Davina, how do you manage the uncertainty of leaving one job, one place, and not yet being at the other one? It's that transition moment. How do you deal with that?
In my opinion, transitions are some of the most uncomfortable places on earth that you can be in. I liken them to being in a hallway where you walked out of one door, you've closed it, but you don't know which one that you need to open yet, or maybe it's not time to open it. So you're also in this period and season of just waiting, and you're not sure what the future holds for you. So when we're in those spaces, I would again focus on how can you sharpen your brand? Are you being crystal clear about the solutions and the results that you bring? If not, this is the time to be clear, sharpen on that, to have some really great business cards that help you stand out, to start collecting portfolio ideas of projects you've oversaw or awards or achievements that came about as a result of something you or your team did, but compiling that to showcase your expertise. That's one really great way to take advantage of this hallway, or I'd like to call waiting room experience, is to keep at it, to sharpen yourself in this area so that when that next door opens, one, you'll be ushered in with such confidence because you know exactly who you are, you know exactly what you have to offer, and it's a lot easier to say no when it's not a good fit. So this is a time of self-discovery. This is a time of sharpening your skills, of determining what you don't want to take with you into the next career in terms of skills that you want to use. And you can build the authority of how you'd like to spend your time. So even though, as I said, I think this is one of the most uncomfortable places on earth, it's in these uncomfortable places where we grow the most. If you allow it, you can either be miserable or use this hallway experience to be your biggest launching pad beyond what you could ever think or imagine. So even though it may feel monotonous, lonely, long, unfair, it can really be a catalyst or a change or a pivot from having stagnant jobs and careers into careers on purpose where you use your gifts and talents every day.
What are the three things that you coach your clients about making the best job transition they possibly can?
One thing I coach people is on the approach. There is a widespread accepted ideology that you should apply for as many jobs as you humanly possibly can in a day. And recently I was speaking with someone who said a nephew of theirs applied for 30, 40 jobs a day. That creates burnout and resentment, and it's not the most efficient use of your time. But again, coming back to that branding piece, when you have a personal brand that works, that makes sense, you can trim the fat and focus specifically on the items that are going to bring you joy, that are aligned with how you'd like to spend your time, with the environment that you'd like to be within as well. So ultimately, I'm just all about efficiency and maximizing the time we have, because once you're rocking and rolling in your career, you won't have a lot of time necessarily to reflect. That's a big thing. Reflect and rest in this space, even though we're like, oh, you might be in a place that you're really just being overlooked, or you're being burdened and you're just resentful of the work you're doing. But in talking about how you approach it, how we look at it, can change everything. So that was one thing. The other thing I coach my clients on is from a personal development standpoint, what's the thing that's sabotaging you? Normally, it lives in our subconscious. We're not seeing it and engaging with it every day, but it's running things. We've got to find out what's going on in your subconscious that could be sabotaging the dreams and goals you have for yourself. And then the third thing that I coach people on is to stay true to what they've outlined that will bring them joy and that would be considered their ideal life. Especially when we're tired of being somewhere. That's another thing I would say. Don't apply for jobs when you're tired or frustrated or any of that, because then you start making mistakes or applying for stuff for the sake of doing it. But if they hire you, you'd be miserable. Instead, how can we keep you centered and grounded to know this next step that you take, this next job that you obtain is one that you're excited to jump out of bed and do? A lot of us don't believe that exists, but it does. But you have to be very well acquainted of what works for you and what doesn't, and staying true to your purpose. So that's the third thing that I coach people on, is to don't deviate from this path. Don't deviate from what you've outlined as being very important to you, because it comes from the subconscious or a place deep down in your soul that's giving you clues of the type of career path that you should be on. So you can't ignore that if you want long-term, sustainable joy, recognition, support, even growth and salaries. That all comes with staying true to your purpose. And first of all, uncovering what that is.
And that leads us to my next question, which is, what can people expect on the other side of transitioning? What's the good stuff?
Oh, the first thing that comes to my mind is relief. when you walk into that job and you've done your research, who they are, and for yourself, what kind of environment you need to be within. When you walk into that place, it's like a hand in glove. When it fits, it's a sigh of relief that you don't have to have Sunday blues or wake up burdened on Monday, barely getting out of bed because you don't want to spend your time at this place. But when you do it right, it's instead of a work-life balance, it becomes a great work-life integration where you're not being pulled in different directions and the things that you're doing are very opposite of who you are as a person. But there's this beautiful integration that happens where you don't feel like work is encroaching upon your time. You don't feel like you're wasting time, but you continue to get sharpened. It's the fire that ignites your energy every single day when you transition into careers on purpose.
Davina, what, if any, unique challenges do candidates of color face when they're going through a transition?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think self-esteem might be one of them, and being concerned if a new place is going to be as accepting of you, or are the politics that you don't agree with or could potentially kind of shut you down with things. So it's, do I want to start over somewhere else where maybe they don't see me or hear me, or where I have to not use colloquialisms that are frequently used in my community? It's that fear and sense of, can I be myself ultimately? Can I be myself without it offending anyone else in this new environment? Should I assimilate to make things easier or to climb up the career ladder? That is a school of thought that is happening right now actively. But yeah, and honestly, if I could speak from personal experience, hair can be one of those as well. Am I going to have to cut my hair because it's not going to jive with this company? Is it going to be seen as unprofessional? Is it going to stop my career growth? And I've heard that on a couple of different occasions. But what it really boils down to is, can I be myself here, my authentic self, without having to change and shift just to go with the flow of the environment?
Davina, any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone going through a career transition?
One really great one is Always the Purpose-Driven Life, because it speaks back to your core and who you are. And once you know who you are, you know the kind of places that you should be at and what you should be doing. I read a book recently called How to Deal with Toxic Work Environments. Some of us don't realize that environments are toxic until we can read about it and then see familiar language that will give us the most informed decision of, do I stay or do I go? I personally have a 90 days to quit checklist, and that's on my website under information about this great program called the 90-Day Career Fix. But there's a checklist there so that you can leave a transition with the most integrity, the most informed, and in a way where you can still have contacts, networking contacts from the place that you just left.
Davina, if our listeners remember only 3 things from our discussion today, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away?
The first one is stay true to your purpose. Discover who you are. Stop putting your wants and ideals on the back burner for a job. They're not mutually exclusive. You can take that together with you down your career ladder. Also, niching down. You cannot be all things to all people. You can't be a coordinator and a strategist and a specialist and a consultant for the fashion industry, the manufacturing industry, the educational sector. You can't. If for those of us who might have a lot of interests, it's very important to narrow down your focus or niching down so that you can have better results. That way you don't have to even sending out 30 to 40 resumes a day, because you'll be hitting a specific target, which means you'll spend less time, but you'll have better aim in hitting it. And the third thing I would say is the interview piece. Don't show up too early. Also, don't underestimate your interviewers, but be authentic and honest about who you are. Because when you're not, they can see that and then they can say, well, I don't know who I just interviewed. But be honest about your quirks and your mistakes. That will help the right people to see you and for you to find an environment that really fits you instead of the pretender.
Davina Ware, As I said at the onset, when we first connected on LinkedIn, I was so excited and pleased to have met someone with your experiences and thoughts and was willing to share so many tips and techniques. From all the listeners, I want to say thank you to you.
Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.